Welcome, everyone. You're listening to the Tech Exchange podcast. My name is Jamal Robinson, business strategist for cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and analytics. Join me as I speak with thought leaders from all areas of the tech industry. On today's show, I'll be speaking with an upcoming augmented and virtual reality superstar. We'll discuss the current state of the industry, accelerators that can speed up adoption, and the best ways to get started in this space. Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Charles Jordan. I am a digital innovation specialist for Nestle. I've been with Nestle for about 20 years in the IT space. AR, VR has been something that's been a passion of mine for a long time. I actually wrote my senior thesis in college on virtual reality and practical applications in the future. So this has been something that's been on my mind for a long time.
Exactly where I'm going with Charles versus trying to talk through this myself. So senior thesis on AR, VR. Can you help me understand what that was even about?
Well, I mean, at the time, it was back in 94, if you will, back at Occidental College. I was looking at, what the future is going to look like and how are we going to be able to interact with it? And virtual reality was one of those things that was on my mind. At the time, I was working for Augmented software. So I saw a lot of applications and games, and I was thinking, what is it going to be like? How are we going to interact with those things? And so I was already thinking of it. And so when the Oculus Rift, the recent headset, went on sale for pre-order, I was like, I need to get on that right away. And I was like, I think it went on sale at like 8 a.m. And by 8:03, I was making my pre-order to get it. So it was definitely something that I was interested in before, in the past, and something that I was trying to get into now in the present.
So as an industry, AR, VR has been around since 94?
I wouldn't say it's been around. I think there's been attempts at trying to do it. I don't think the hardware was really up to speed to be able to do some of the things. I mean, Nintendo came out with the Power Glove or Virtual Boy. I think that's what it was. But I think now we're really getting to a point where we actually can make some very immersive experiences with some of the high-end headsets like the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. I remember that Nintendo headset that had all the red in the back with the red Mario jumping around, which looked crazy. So Charles, it seems like you got started back in 94. So just thinking about your education and your background and stuff, maybe if you can walk us through that. So I know AR, VR hadn't been around for that long, but maybe what was your education in? What was your major? Maybe what did you do in high school? Just kind of walk people through that.
Okay. My major in college was cognitive science. I went to Occidental College, which was a little small liberal arts college in Los Angeles. And in high school, there wasn't, you do your normal curriculum, but I was really into video games. I had a Commodore 64 back in the day, just to begin. I think actually Texas Instrument 99.4A was actually even before that.
For the people like myself and maybe even younger, explain what a Commodore 64 is.
The early PC the earliest PC where you could actually have one in your home was probably the Texas Instrument 99.4A. And then there were some TRS-80s and the Apple came around, and then PC, basically was around. But for me, the Commodore 64 was basically my first real introduction where I sat down and tried to teach myself BASIC, played a bunch of video games. And I think really for me, that was the driver, is because once you play video games, you enjoy the world and you try to see not just how do you play them, but how do you make them? How do you create them? And then that was sort of a driving force for me to get into the tech area. And I mean, from there, from college, it's been basically trying to work in any type of field that involved computers, whether that been tech support, help desk, any type of technology field, because I think that any time you're in it, you're going to be exposed to it.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. So for the youth out there looking to get in this space, just be passionate about it seems. You had an interest in video games. You took that to the next level. And then I like your point about the tech industry, because essentially you just put yourself in that environment. That environment allowed you to incubate your skills and hear different things here and there. And
what I think about the kids today, I mean, they have such an opportunity. Back in the day, there were books or encyclopedias that we had to read, and they were outdated the moment they got to you. But today, they can look at YouTube right away. They can learn anything they want to learn. They don't have to wait. I recently ran into a 16-year-old kid from Switzerland who actually started programming his own game, and he did it by himself, basically downloading Unity application that helps you program for free off the internet. And he was able to create some pretty amazing things after going through the tutorial. No education required, just YouTube.
Yeah, I always say that myself. I feel the hindrance for the kids today is that they have so much available opportunity. Where I remember when I was younger, my parents had to go out and buy the encyclopedia, and very costly, had to wait till that was shipped. But like you said, as soon as they printed those books, new things are happening. Kids nowadays have the paradox of choice, where you have so many choices, it ultimately paralyzes you. Let's now kind of move into the technology a bit. So a question that I'm sure you get quite often, the foundational question: what is the difference between AR, VR? They're used synonymously. I know I'm probably a guy like you that's an expert, maybe even irritates you, but help explain the difference.
AR and VR, I mean, right now they're two separate terms that we think of. Virtual reality is when you are basically put in a whole, your entire visual view is basically taken over and you're put in another environment. Think holodeck or something like that. Okay. Augmented reality is when it basically alters your existing view with some data or information or some characters or graphics. I think when we think of these two things, we think of them separately. But I think as we get deeper into the technology, we'll start using the term that Microsoft uses, mixed reality or blended reality, a lot more often, because you'll see as we get further down the line, these devices will be able to not only block your view and take over your entire view and show you, maybe put you on a beach somewhere in Jamaica, or it could just augment your existing view and maybe put a monitor or a TV screen on your wall.
That'd be pretty sweet. There's plenty of times I'm at work and I wish that I could feel like I was in Jamaica, not sitting at work. So you mentioned Microsoft. So in this space, I hear a lot of things. It's hard to assess which one's anecdotal. Who do you think is really like knocking it out the park with AR or VR right now? Like who are the leaders in the industry?
I mean, when you talk VR, I wouldn't say. I mean, I still think it's sort of, once again, both cases is somewhat new. I mean, I think that the leaders are definitely, Facebook, who owns Oculus, as well as HTC Vive. Both of those are the two major players out there. Oh, I forgot. Let's not forget Sony with the PSVR. They're major players in it as well. When I say anybody's knocking it out the park, I think everybody's experimenting right now. They're putting their foot in the water. I think that the people the team that I'm rooting for right now is Facebook, and with their Oculus Rift. They have a device coming out called the Oculus Go, and I think that it's going to really help to bring virtual reality to the masses. I think that when we think of virtual reality, we want to think about the highest end and the highest graphics, but really right now it's all about adoption. And if we could get more and more people using it, we could then focus on increasing the quality of it. So I would say right now, the focus would be, I would say the major player for me, and I think obviously this is debatable because people say, well, Microsoft has the new headsets, or PSVR because they have the most user base. But I really think when in the long-term strategy that Facebook is doing, I think they really see social as the main driving killer app, if you will, for VR. And I think once they get the Oculus Go in the hands of more people and they start really realizing the dream of bringing the social space together within VR, I think you'll see a big push. But right now, I think it's too early to say. Okay. With AR, I mean, once again, that's a technology that's 2 or 3 years away. I think that they say in the year 2021 will be maybe a $15 billion industry, but right there, it's not there. I think when you talk about AR, obviously people talk about Pokemon Go, but I mean, when you think about Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, they're pretty heavy users of it. And when people think about an AR, a practical AR experience that people actually use, I would say, companies like Snapchat or Facebook Messenger are probably doing the most in that area.
Okay. Maybe 2 follow-up questions. So when you talk about VR and Oculus Go, is that the recent device that they announced that's $200?
Yes. The Oculus Go was released at their recent Oculus Connect. It's supposed to come out early in 2018. It's basically a complete VR headset that you don't need a phone, nor do you need a computer. It's totally untethered. So you can actually just take it, put it on your head and have the experience, which is basically some of the barriers that people have been having today.
Okay. And even your comment on the AR in 2020. So I looked at a recent report that believe it was coming out of Fortune, and they were talking about Apple, and they perceive that Apple's going to dive deep in the AR space, and their glasses should be ready around 2020. So is there something special about that date as far as the technology will arrive to some point?
Well, right now, when we talk about augmented reality, I mean, outside of the examples that I mentioned before, I mean, true practical experience that we really, dream about. I mean, they're difficult when you're just using your phone and you're trying to scan something. The reality or for augmented reality to really reach its fruition or, reach its high point, I think somebody has to release some augmented reality glasses, and Apple would be, someone who's poised to do something like that. I mean, Google did have their Google Glass earlier, but obviously the implementation didn't go as well. But when Apple does release something, if they're able to actually follow up with the platform or foundation that they've just created with releasing ARKit, then I think that they will basically change the future.
Okay. And I guess you're getting to my next question. So I try to do some research prior to this interview as far as like what the biggest roadblocks to adoption are. And the things that I ran across were hardware. Hardware is very expensive. The Microsoft headset, which I've tried myself, $3,000. And then there was another company that produced headsets at $1,000. Also, the content is not there. There's just not enough developers that have produced games or content. And then the last part being a lack of education, where there's not enough people that understand the value prop. I would say the reason why you're on the show today is because you essentially changed my life by giving me access to your setup of, what was that, Oculus Rift at your house. Before I walked into that, I didn't really see the value prop. I've tried those little headsets in the mall. I'm like, okay, this is a gimmick. When I tried your system, I mean, afterwards, the same way these soldiers have these flashbacks after they leave the war, I was having flashbacks of those virtual environments, like some truly amazing things. So when you think about it, and I think about that technology, why is the world, from your perspective, not running to this right now? Why is it not ubiquitous?
I mean, I think the things you meant, hardware was probably the biggest barrier. With the high-end experiences, you actually need a pretty hefty PC. Usually PC runs around anywhere $900 to $1,500, and really to have a good experience. And most people aren't going to run out and do that. That's probably the reason why the PSVR has such a large install base, because a lot of people had a console system already. I think that's why I mentioned the Oculus Go. It'll be the first one to come out that doesn't need a phone, nor does it need a heavy PC. And maybe hopefully that will speed adoption. When people say lack of content, I challenge that. Though there's not many AAA, there is enough software and experiences out there that if you have a VR headset, that you won't run out of things to do. So I really don't think content. I think obviously more content is always better, but I really don't think that's what's holding us back. I really think it's more the adoption. And I think the last point, what was the last one?
I believe it was hardware, and then it was the content.
Oh, lack of education.
Yeah, lack of education on the value prop.
Yeah, I think that'll be one of those things where people need to try it. And the problem is, and this is what's probably going to slow it. It's going to slow it a little bit, because when people do experience it over the mobile headphones, or they do experience even on the Oculus Go, it won't be the full featured experience that you had in an Oculus Rift with full on controllers and what have you. It will be a more slimmed down, more practical experience. And then hopefully people will, levitate to that, and that'll build the adoption rate. But I think it's going to be a slow moving thing.
And that's fair. Historically, tech has not always been a fast-moving thing, although for headlines and podcasts and newspapers, we want to make it seem like it's overnight because that's a lot sexier. But yeah, most tech takes a while to find its way through society and which markets it's going to be able to be most successful in, which I guess is another question I have. So right now for AR, VR, who are some of the current adopters? Are we talking different enterprises looking for ways to leverage even Nestle to use it for business? Are we talking about consumers, purely video games, entertainment? Is there some other space?
Well, actually, there's a lot of use cases out there, and I think people are just finding ways to just apply it. I mean, video games, it's obviously the one that, people have went to first, and it's been the one that's been driving it. But obviously there's things like porn, which is obviously drove the VHS industry, and that's pretty big. But actually, the thing as we look more in towards the retail space or corporate space, we see things like training, both on the let's say corporate as well as the plants and factories and things like that. We've actually looked at things like how do you train people by giving them maybe an onboard experiences in virtual reality, and how could that improve things? We've seen companies like KFC create training, I think, for making chicken in virtual reality. So you see companies like that using it. I really see these type of experiences not get better and more immersive, and we'll see things like more social experiences. I'll see more things in terms of interacting, conferences, town hall meetings. I really see that coming up as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I've even seen where the U.S. Department of Education had a EdSim Challenge program back in 2015. And this basically was a program that called for someone to develop some type of immersive solution in order to transfer academic information. So basically educate people. So I've seen where even governments in the public sector are starting to adopt this. I think a lot of people would probably be able to visualize somebody in the government using it to train them how to kill or fly drones. But I do see a lot of other applicable use cases. So do you have any understanding of maybe different governments and who's been using this and how?
The military, especially for some of their ops, there's actually some pretty well done military strategy games that actually puts them in the environment. And it's so different than maybe a 2D something or even a flight simulator where you are using a computer screen. Now you're actually in the environment and you could actually simulate real world combat or real world flying scenarios so that you could actually see how people really react and not just pretend.
And actually, flight simulators is an excellent example. I would imagine the amount of jet fuel that's used to go out and train somebody, or even the risk associated with them not really knowing how to fly an airplane. If you can do that in simulation first, but then make it submersive in a VR simulation, that makes a lot of sense also. So
now, one area that we didn't talk about that it's actually beginning to use is in sports. Terry Bridgewater from the Minnesota Vikings usually has been using VR because he's been using it to get back return from injury. So while he's actually healing himself and going through rehab, he actually doesn't have to miss some of the practices, the mental reps that are taken, because he could actually take video from someone else's reps, actually watch them, and then make the same decisions himself. So they can use virtual reality to actually take mental reps to help them get back on the field faster.
And I can visualize that specifically because you had me play, what was that football game?
VR Sports Challenge.
VR Sports Challenge. And for those out there who haven't played it, picture something like Madden, or if you're a little bit older, Tecmo Bowl. I would say the difference between VR Sports Challenge and Madden is equivalent of the difference between Tecmo Bowl and Madden. Picture yourself, you're in a VR headset. When you hike the ball, I'm looking left, I'm looking right, I'm making sure that my receivers are set. I'm looking down the field. When the guy hits the crossing route, I got to hit it in perfect timing. I'm also trying not to get blitzed. I'm not even doing it a great job explaining it here. It is a completely submersive environment to where I thought I was on the field. So for an NFL player to be using something like that makes a lot of sense. Something else I've been looking at recently also, sticking with video games or thinking of entertainment. So previously I went out as an African-American male. I go out to buy a video game. The character is kind of projected onto me. The character may be a white male, age 40, black hair, 6 foot, whatever his attributes are. Now it seems like with AR, VR, less more so in the VR space, it seems like I have the ability to be the main character in the game, where now you don't have to sculpt the game around a specific, even gender. I can get into a game and let's say I am a woman, age 20-something, that speaks French and currently living in Cambodia. I could go through in the beginning and set the parameters, and then they can speak to me in French. They could address me as a woman directly by name. And I mean, it truly makes not only the VR aspect, but it seems like it truly makes that more submersive. So do you see content developers starting to be more, I guess, specific in being generic and allowing the person to kind of project themselves in, where previously we had to project ourselves onto?
Well, I mean, I think this is something that has been an obstacle that's been faced not just in VR, but in regular 2D games as well, But then there are games like Mass Effect that do allow you to, choose your gender, create your character sort of how you want it. Obviously, there are some games that don't, but I really don't think this is something that's specifically for VR. I think this is just something for video games in general. And I think that, I think with VR, you'll see more of an opportunity for people try to represent who they really are. But I think just like in video games, I think this is a make-up world. So I think even in the VR space, people will still create who they want to be as opposed to who they are.
Even thinking about the creatives that create in this space. So I sat in a room and I was listening to people talk on a panel, and some of the nuances that I wouldn't even think about. If I was going to direct a movie, it's an understanding that the person watching is going to be in a 2D format. They're going to see exactly what's in the frame of the television. But do you have any thoughts on how you even create, whether it's video game or a television show or a movie, how do you create a show like that when, if you're given a 360-degree view, somebody walks in the room, if I'm looking forward at another actor or the person that walks in the room, I don't know them as an actor and know that they're Brad Pitt and I should be paying attention to them. How do you even direct the attention to the right places at the right times? Like, have you heard anybody talk about that, how to develop content, or have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I actually attended a workshop called The Future of Storytelling, where they actually dealt with this specific thing. As we go into this new medium, there are new challenges that we have to deal with. The 2D space we've done for 60, 80 years, whereas we've only started this 360 space very shortly. But there are a lot of ways that they could actually, or they try to, adjust the cues. They could tell which way you're looking. They use audio to direct where you could look at and to try to help you tell the story. But many times I've seen people sit in VR stories and they sort of miss the entire story for that very reason. I think that as we go further in this storytelling space in VR, people will just get better at it. I definitely see it's going to be challenges, but I mean, I think those are just things that we'll deal with, because I have seen some very good 360 movie experiences. And I've seen some not so good ones. And I think that's just going to be the case as we go forward.
Okay. We're just going to hope that Avatar 3 comes out in VR format. And I'm almost guaranteed that's going to push most of the rest of the industry forward when they make so much money off of it. So thinking about industries in general and being pushed forward. So when I think about autonomous driving, or myself, I have the artificial intelligence background. With AI, people are given that scenario. If you have a school bus full of nuns and a school bus full of children and the cars are going to hit each other, which one do you throw off the cliff to save the other? Different legislative hurdles that essentially could hold that industry back, where the tech may advance faster than legislation. Do you see anything similar happening in the AR, VR space? And maybe what are some of the biggest legislative hurdles that you think are on the horizon?
For the VR space, I'm going to skip for now, but for the AR space, that one, as we think about the future and we think about what the augmented future looks like, let's say we think of everybody wearing augmented reality glasses walking down the street. I mean, I think there's got to be some legislation on what you can and cannot see, what you can and cannot display. There's going to be patents. There's going to be things about, because you're going to be able to look and there's going to be stuff on the wall. And is that stuff going to be stuff that just you see on the wall? Is that going to be public stuff that you see on the wall? I think there's going to be a lot of regulations around how that stuff is displayed, what can be displayed. Almost like having a PG rating on your glasses that'll actually restrict certain content that you walk down the street. So I definitely see something like that coming up.
The area that I personally worry about a little bit more is the fact that there's a camera sitting on these devices. It's like, if you're walking through with your glasses on, are you recording me? If you're pulling in that image for an application, am I in the public domain, and am I just automatically given rights to have my image? What kind of happens in those areas?
I think that's an issue already. I mean, people have those snap glasses from Snapchat, and they could actually do that already. Or you never know when somebody's taking a selfie or recording you. So,
while you brought up Snapchat, I guess that's a relevant thing I'd like to discuss too. So, I've been fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at that, enough to have one of those pairs of glasses. What is going on with Snapchat? Like, I felt like there was a real opportunity there with those glasses because they had at least a certain demographic that were willing to accept anything Snapchat was pushing out. They tried to be ultra exclusive and have these pop-up stores where you couldn't even get access to the glasses and almost had to trip over one. They didn't even let you know where the store was. And then all of a sudden I see an article saying that they can't sell those things. And now they're trying to take them to Europe, or I believe it was London, to push those off. So do you have any insight there? What was going on?
You know what? I've tried those glasses, and you know what? I actually kind of like them personally. I do see the reasons for why they didn't, pick up, catch on as they should. Just some of the reasons that you talked about earlier in terms of privacy. They also looked a little silly, but if they would have made it available to everybody right away, people would have rushed out and got them, and it would have been the cool thing to do to see, the circle Snapchat thing in your feed. But I think that they really lost their opportunity. I think they tried to be too cute there, and they missed out. But I mean, Snapchat is not it's one of those things that I wouldn't, how do you say, discount so much. I mean, I think right now they're getting copied a lot in some of the things they do by Instagram and Facebook. But I really think that the millennials, the young folks, are really, into Snapchat. And if you've ever used it and got used to it, it's a very actually powerful application in terms of its chat and video, etc. I think it's going to be a major player in the years as these kids grow up, because they don't use Facebook. It's for old people, they say. So I mean, though Snapchat has had its struggles with their glasses, I don't think that they're out. You could count them out just yet.
And I definitely agree. To a certain age of people, Snapchat is significantly better than Facebook. I hear that pretty consistently. And to that comment, Facebook is for old people. My mom, who's like 160, is actually on Facebook and constantly trying to get people to send her messages on there. So I could see something like that happening. Let's stick with maybe Snapchat and their opportunities, and just thinking about that space and what will be the tipping point. So we kind of touched lightly on Apple, and I don't think Apple necessarily inherently is a tipping point style company, but I think because of their platform, like thinking about whatever they adopt for the iPhone, because there's only a few models of iPhone out versus Android. You have all these different models and it's hard to push something. Typically, Apple has been able to be the tipping point for a lot of different advancements in the mobile space. So thinking about AR, I listened to Tim Cook talk, and he said he thinks AR is going to be a lot stronger than VR, which makes sense from his perspective. Do you see Apple being able to move the industry forward, or do you see that maybe another player would be the tipping point, where maybe Snapchat's version 2 of their glasses, or I don't know, maybe Home Depot or some other company we don't expect? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, when we think about AR glasses, there's a lot of companies that are making them and trying to get into that AR space. I really think that it's going to have to be a phone manufacturer, or unless we get past this phone piece, it really knows how technology is going to go. Is it going to be Android or Apple who just going to just create some AR glasses that are just going to take over the industry? It's possible, but it's very possible there could be someone else that could make something, an entirely new platform that could basically take over. But I doubt it, because they're so entrenched. But you never know. Amazon could do anything. You never know. But yeah. I mean, right now, I think with their AR kit, I think they're definitely poised to definitely make an impact. But with Steve Jobs left, they really haven't done anything really creative, in just my opinion. So, I mean, it's really going to be, I don't want to say he left, but he passed. I don't know if you say it, rest in peace. But basically, Apple, I think they're definitely going to be a major player. They're going to definitely help to push it. But I think they're going to need Android with their AR core to help as well, to help the industry as a whole and not just Apple, in order for AR to really take on.
Yeah, and I'll add one comment. If Tim Cook, if you're listening, notice that Charles made that comment about innovation with Apple. I didn't make that. So if you ever want to come on my show, I think you guys are really innovative. So don't charge me for that. Thinking about people that would like to, I work in business. I'm looking to learn as much as possible about AR, VR. I've went through a couple sites, but like thinking about conferences where the thought leaders in this space are at, like what conferences might you recommend for somebody to attend, or what forms of media for somebody more on the business side looking to see how they can leverage that for their company?
I mean, there are a lot of conferences that happen on a year basis. I mean, if you're in Silicon Valley, I think that there's things that you could go to, 2, 3, 4 different types of sessions, meetups, conferences, workshops that you could go to on a regular basis. If you're not in Silicon Valley, you don't have access to those type of things, then I would recommend, websites like TechCrunch, Reddit, YouTube even, just to find out what's going on. But when we think about VR, it's one of those things where you actually have to experience it. You have to do it. So in some way, some form or another, get yourself a VR headset. If it's not if you don't want to spend the much for the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, go ahead and think about doing something in the Google Cardboard space or Samsung VR space. See what you could get, experiment as much as you can. Yeah, I think finally Reddit is probably on Facebook, join as many virtual reality groups that are out there. But Reddit is really the home of really having conversations about virtual reality and emerging technologies. I think that's a good place to go.
Okay. So just to recap that, it seems like even at the enterprise level now, it's still like a grassroots movement. So there won't necessarily be a go to Gartner's, and which I'm sure Gartner's has a perspective on this. But right now, people and companies that need to go out and leverage this, they need to look at this as an emerging technology and go to different grassroots locations to see, okay, the people that are trying to build the future, what are they talking about now? And let's start to scope business around what we expect to come. But there's not really a single source of truth because this industry is at such a preliminary stage. Is that kind of an accurate assessment?
Yes. I mean, if I was someone in an enterprise or a company and I was looking to use VR internally, I would definitely look at it in terms of training, onboarding type of experiences and things like that. And then obviously if you want to use it for your company, most things have been promotional in terms of user-facing promotional things like that. If you could find a use case, depending on, what your area is, then I would definitely try to experiment, do some MVPs, test it out, see what people think.
Okay. And just maybe even adding to that point. So from my understanding, you and we met in Silicon Valley, and that was because Nestle scoured through their hundreds of thousands of employees and said, hey, we're going to pick our best talent and send them out to Silicon Valley for a few months in order to get a perspective on AR, VR. And that's where they sent you out with another team to basically scout and see how Nestle can adopt that. Is that kind of why you're here?
Yeah, basically it was more of a push than a pull. They basically advertised and they said if someone's interested, they could come, and they picked people from different countries or zone. And I was the American chosen, but there were people from Germany, Poland, Switzerland, and Turkey. And basically and Brazil, I'm sorry, I don't want to miss that. But they were all there, and we came together to basically be immersed into the digital environment here in Silicon Valley. And there's a lot here to be immersed in.
So would you recommend that for large companies? Hey, put together a team of diverse business units and then let them go out to Silicon Valley or wherever it makes sense to basically submerge themselves into AR, VR to learn?
Well, I mean, when you have large companies like Nestle and some other ones, they move really slow. I mean, it's difficult for them to really touch these technologies and feel them. So yes, it's nice to have a small team who could actually go look at these things and see where you could innovate both internally and externally using it. I mean, because you're not going to have experts across the organization, so you might as well create your crack team, sort of a commandos, if you will, to go out and learn this information and see where it could be applied.
Okay. And maybe one last comment on conferences before we leave. So I've also seen you sitting on panels and talking, and I believe you have a conference coming up. Can you speak to some of that?
I recently had the honor of speaking on a panel at the Virtual Reality Strategy Conference on Fortune 5 companies who were saying yes to VR training. That's VR training, as I mentioned a few times earlier. I mean, within corporations, I think that's a really good opportunity to identify use cases to use virtual reality. I think that there's a number of companies like Compedia and Striver that are out there trying to adapt the technology to try to make this thing more easier. I think that when people do training in VR, they retain a lot more information. I think the statistic is like 80% of the information they'll retain after a year, as opposed to 20% that they'll remember in a week after traditional training. So I really think it's something that people should look into. Definitely.
Okay, great. So, in wrapping up here, so thinking about you and I, when we speak again 12 months from now, what do you foresee you'll be doing in this space? Where do you think the industry will be at?
Well, I mean, when we get at about a year from now, I mean, we'll be on the precipice of the second generation of the VR coming. I think we'll start seeing, we'll start having rumors of what is to come. But hopefully by that time, we will have some, for me personally, I will find myself deeper in it as the technology grows. But for me specifically, I would like to get into do more in the VR training space in terms of building and doing design thinking sessions on trying to see what that looks like in the future.
And as I can imagine, there's not many people in this space that are experts. So thinking about yourself, what's the best way if I want to work with you? I've listened to this podcast or I've seen some of your content or went to one of your shows. What's the best way for people to find out more about you, to see what you're working on and get in contact with you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. You can reach me, Charles Jordan, on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest and fastest way to contact me. And, I'll get back to you. Let's talk, have a meeting. Let's see where you're at.
Okay. And I've looked at some of your posts, specifically the one with the panel, and it seems like you responded to everybody's comments. So that's a good sign. You always have people that put things out there and they could care less about the interaction, but you seem to be pretty engaged with people. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, it's pretty active. It's a new space, and people have different ideas all over the world. And it's, LinkedIn is a global platform. It's nice to see what other people are thinking. I think even in the post that I put on the panel discussion, I had people from Israel commenting, going, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we should get together and talk about it." And I was like, "Yes, let's have a meeting." So, I mean, in taking all these ideas and these perspectives, I think this approach is really going to help drive the industry, because it's not going to be done in one person creating it. It's going to have to be a collective effort.
Well, Charles, I want to thank you a lot for your time. This has been very informative, I'm sure, for most of the listeners, but specifically for me, I've learned a lot. Like I said, you've changed my life, being able to get access to your Oculus system. Beforehand, I thought it was a bit of a gimmick, but now, I'm a true believer. And then also can see where enterprises can benefit from this, but then also public sector companies can benefit from it too, and the government can use it. So very interesting space. Want to thank you, Charles, for joining the show. And with that, thanks for listening.
Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to The Tech Exchange with Jamal Robinson. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you can reach out on LinkedIn, Medium, where I post my latest articles, or Twitter at Jamal Robinson84. That's Jamal, Jamal, Robinson84. Until next time, take care.